Another episode of Podcast and Co. Today I'm talking to the man, the myth, the legend, Carl Zha. He is the host and the founder of the Silk and Steel podcast, which is a podcast on Chinese history and politics. And he also has his own YouTube channel and X account with hundreds of thousands of followers and subscribers where he provides his geopolitical commentary and analysis. People love hearing from him. You love hearing from him. That's why we've had him on the program several times. So I wanted to bring him in again today in the lead up to what could be an aggressive end to the ceasefire and what all of this means. So I want to welcome our guest, Carl. Carl, thanks for being here again.
Thanks, Amal. Thank you for that lovely intro.
Absolutely, my friend. So, Carl, people are talking a lot about the petrogas dollar. This is something that Richard Medhurst introduced, but it's also something that Brian Berletic also kind of alludes to. And both of them argue that the United States is not acting as impulsively as some people might think, that this isn't a mad king, Donald Trump, held hostage by neocons and Zionists, that this is actually a multi-decade plan by the United States, not only to destroy Iran, which we've seen in the think tank papers, but it's also something that they've been planning to do in order to corner China, and that this is their way of trying to limit China and disrupt the Belt and Road Initiative. And so they want to disrupt energy flow. And so from that perspective, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz is not an accident or a miscalculation. It's actually a deliberate, designed tactic and action. And for this reason, they argue that there will be no end to the war and that this is actually designed to try and curb China. So I wanted to get your thoughts on the entire war, so far, and how you feel this may or may not be related to China. So I guess we can start first with the war itself and its relation and how China is perceiving it.
Well, I mean, China has made it very clear during the recent UN Security Council debate on basically on whether it's legal to close the Strait of Hormuz. China made it clear this is not about this is not on Iran. This whole situation was brought about by the illegal attack by U.S. and Israel on Iran. This is Iran is doing what it could to defend its own sovereignty. The only realistic solution to the crisis is to have a peace deal. That has been China's position all along. China always supported Iran's position in this. And as for the plan that you were referring to, my take is just because they have a plan doesn't mean they're competent implementers. For a little bit historical perspective, people may or may not remember the Iraq War. And the Iraq War was, turns out, also about oil because Alan Greenspan wrote that in his memoir, and because he was one of the top U.S. elite who are in on the plan. According to Alan Greenspan's memoir, the plan was not necessarily to for the U.S. companies to take over the oil in the region, but it's rather to allow United States to control the flow of the oil. This was back in 2003. This was like China's rise, which is about to take off. But even back then, according to Alan Greenspan, the Pentagon and Washington has saw that China has become increasingly dependent on the oil and gas flow from Persian Gulf. So they thought by capturing Iraq, United States will get to dictate how the oil will flow and thus gain a huge leverage over China. Well, how did that war turn out? In the beginning they say, okay, China lost bigly because China had a lot of investment in the oil sector in Saddam's Iraq, but as the war progressed, it turns out China actually did pretty well. Chinese oil company went back. Right now, Chinese oil company are still in Iraq digging oil. They have a lot of oil contract. This just show you how poorly the plan was carried out by the United States. this nobody ever accused Dick Cheney being a dum dum, right? Dick Cheney was an evil genius behind the whole Iraq War operation. Yet the whole war on Iraq was so poorly conceived and so poorly implemented. There, in the end, China did end up getting a huge share of the Iraq's oil sector. So how did that did it did not absolutely did not crimp China's rise in any way. Well, what he did though, what the Iraq War did, as Sanchez pointed out, he was talking about Afghanistan war at the time. What the war really did is to wash vast sum of money from the tax bases of North America and Europe and into the pockets of a very small transnational security elite. That it did very well, including Dick Cheney's Halliburton. They made out like bandits in the Iraq War, but it's to the detriment of everybody else. Did that stop China? No, it didn't. This current war, it doesn't mean that United States didn't have, it's very possible that US went into this war planning to gain leverage on China again. There's a lot of talks from various conservative neocon think tanks, like particularly Hudson Institute, talking about this is how Trump is going to gain leverage over China prior to his trip to meet with Xi Jinping in Beijing by locking down the oil in Venezuela and then locking down the oil in Iran. And then Trump can go to Beijing and say, I got you by the balls. Now, how about opening up your rare earth supply chain to us? Well, that may have been the plan, but that's not how, currently, if Trump does go to Beijing, which is still a big question mark at this point, he will go to Beijing with a very weak hand because he does not have control over Iranian oil. In fact, the Strait of Hormuz is closed. And China, as I have pointed out before, China has the world's largest strategic oil reserve. The size of China's strategic oil reserve is bigger than United States, Europe, Japan combined. That's how big it is. And it's China has about like 1.4 trillion barrels of oil. And a month into this war, China has not drawn down on its reserve because oil still coming in. Oil continue to come in to China from Russia, from Iran, and from Venezuela. So there's and so we can see the effect of that. In the beginning of the war, China says, okay, we're gonna lock down our export of all the refined petroleum products. China is one of the largest exporter of gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel to Asia because China has huge refining capacity. China says, okay, we're going to have to reserve all these for ourselves or for our domestic producers. And that caused a huge supply chain disruption because countries like Australia, for example, they depend 32% of their jet fuel on imports from China. But China just recently announced that they are going to lift the export ban on gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. That's not a country does not look like a country that seems to be is running out of oil, right? I mean, the fact that they're going to allow these re-export, and this is huge because not just these gasoline products, but also fertilizers. China is also one of the largest exporter of chemical fertilizer to the world. Japanese farmers heavily depend on imports of chemical fertilizer from China, for example. And this is actually good news for all the countries in Asia. Now they don't have to worry about getting gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, and fertilizer from China. It's particularly now because it's spring planting season. If farmers don't get their fertilizer now, we're going to have food shortages, later this year. So by China publicly announcing they're going to open up and resume export of these petroleum products means China is not worried about its oil supply. So I mean, it's quite possible that was United States' plan to choke off China's energy supply, but it doesn't. It affected U.S. allies far more than it affected China because U.S. allies like Japan, South Korea, Philippines, Australia, Singapore, they're all heavily dependent on oil and gas coming from the Gulf. China was always getting oil from elsewhere as well, like from Russia, for example. This is the whole reason Scott Bessent has waived this Russian oil sanction because his idea is okay. We gotta if the all this Russian oil are going through China, if we waive the Russian sanction, at least some of our allies can buy some of this Russian oil, right? That's why they granted a waiver to India, for example, to allow India to resume purchasing Russian oil, and recently they extended that to the Philippines as well. But China has a less of that problem than these other countries, and this also pointed out huge problem of this whole logic of choking off China's energy supply. U.S. Navy and all the think tanks has publicly stated for years that Strait of Malacca is a choke point on Chinese energy supply. But if you choke out Strait of Malacca, you're not just choking off supply for China. You're choking off all the countries in East Asia, Japan, South Korea, Philippines. All these countries will turn against you. And like I said, these countries are far more dependent on the Persian Gulf energy import. China is about 86% energy independent, energy self-sufficient in terms of primary energy production because China has it produces electricity from solar, wind, nuclear, hydro, and coal. And China has one of the world's largest coal deposit. So when you cut off the 20% of the world's gas supply from Persian Gulf, well, that just means a lot of the power plants are gonna switch to burning coal rather than burning natural gas. And China has plenty of coal. And China also possesses the world's top coal to oil technology. But the threshold for that the coal to oil process is only profitable around $75 per. If the oil price is about $75 per barrel, but right now the Brent is about way over $100 barrel for oil, so that makes the coal to oil process immensely profitable. China can just switch that on and make it economic. So China will be okay in the end. China is much better prepared than most of the other countries in the world. So if that was a U.S. plan to choke off China's energy, then it's a stupid plan. And they didn't think about the consequences because this does affect. People say, oh, but United States will be fine because U.S. is a net energy exporter. Well, that is true, but U.S. is actually a net oil importer. What United States export is a lot of gas, but United States imports about 6 million barrels of oil per day, and so when the oil price goes up, it does hit U.S. as well. And this, in fact, we're getting reports that the farm bankruptcy in the United States had gone up 45% since the war because farmers can no longer afford the increase in diesel price and the increase in the fertilizers. So this does affect United States as well. U.S. economy is about 40% more oil intensive than the Chinese economy, which is pretty mind-boggling considering everything is made in China already, and yet United States is still far more hydrocarbon dependent than China is.
So I want to ask you for a couple of clarifications. So you said that China had 1.4 trillion with a T barrels of
Bill,
oil.
billion, billion, billion,
Billion.
billion,
Okay,
billion.
okay.
Sorry, billion,
You blew my
billion,
mind for a
not
second
trillion.
because okay. All right, all right. Maybe I misheard you, but I thought I heard it with a T. That was maybe about
Billion,
15
billion.
minutes ago, but okay. So 1.4 billion. I actually read it was 1.8 billion the other day. Whatever the number is, it sounds like it's because of what you just mentioned here, which is their domestic stockpile surged because they limited the export of the refining process. I guess so. They receive crude oil and then they refine it and then they would give it to Australia and other places. You said, Australia was dependent on like 30% of their jet fuel came from China or whatever the case was. So
Yeah.
China limited the domestic they limited the international exports, increased the domestic stockpile, and now you're saying the situation is so stabilized for them that they may restart exporting the
Yes.
oil, right? Okay. So this is all very interesting.
Refined petroleum products. So China imports crude oil, but China has a lot of refining capacity. So China will export refined gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. Yeah,
And all of
and
these types of
Australia.
fuel, I was just going to ask, all this
Go
different
ahead. Go
kind
ahead.
of
Sorry.
fuel, all of this fuel, these different kinds of petroleum products require different refineries and refining processes. Is that correct? Okay. And China is
That's
like a
correct, and
leading nation in the world doing that.
that's in fact. But by the way, China has come a long way because when I was growing up in China in 1980s, back then China was exporting crude oil and importing gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel because China back then didn't have enough refining capacity. So it was exporting crude oil to Japan and importing gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, and chemical fertilizers. But over the last 40 years, China has built out so much capacity. Now China is one of the major exporter of gasoline, diesel, chemical fertilizer to Asia region. And this is and you brought up a good point actually about different type of oil, fuel, and different type of oil. People talk about Venezuela, right? For example, people often say Venezuela has a world's largest oil reserve. Now, what people don't understand is there's different grade of crude oil. The type of crude oil that's coming from Venezuela is called the very heavy crude. It's almost like tar-like, and what they usually use, that type of oil is used is for paving the road, asphalt. But to actually extract like useful like gasoline, diesel, jet fuel from the Venezuelan type of crude actually requires a lot of energy. And this is why a lot of during the meeting with the big oil majors, they're all very hesitant to invest in Venezuela because they will have to invest tons of money over decades to to even recoup their investment, and they are just not sure that's worth it. And the type of oil coming from the Gulf region, from the Persian Gulf region, they are light, sweet, so they require very little processing. But and for example, Venezuela, for a long time, the Venezuelan oil industry, they actually had to import a lot of oil from Iran because they have to mix in the Iranian oil with the Venezuelan oil so that you will actually flow through the pipelines. Because the Venezuelan oil is so heavy, so dense, it's like almost solid. It doesn't even flow. You have to mix it in with other more the light sweet oil from Iran to make it even flow through the pipelines. Um, so by United States capturing Venezuela oil, it doesn't mean that okay now United States own all these energy source, and also Venezuelan oil is still going to China by the way as we speak. So yeah, so I to say that somehow this is gonna be U.S. will have China by the balls is nonsense. And this is not what U.S. have is not even enough to convince China to give up on its export control on rare earth, because China did place export control on rare earth since last year, particularly against the U.S. military-industrial complex. So they're going to have some serious trouble to replenish their ammunitions, particularly cruise missiles. There's a lot of rare earth going to F-35s and Patriot missiles, etc.
So it sounds like you don't think that this strategy will work, and that's a question of whether or not this is even the strategy. So I guess it comes down to like, is there a method to this madness or not? And people like Brian Berletic have pointed out very correctly that the Iran war has been planned for a very long time. Curbing China obviously is in the U.S. interest. There are think tank papers detailing this, which path to Persia, etc. And so this was always going to be the plan. I guess the question has always been, why now? And I used to perceive it as strictly, sorry, if you'll just allow me to finish my point. The reason I interpreted it happening now because of Zionist pressure. But then I came across this piece of information that the Chinese had actually discovered this, like the world's largest deposit of uranium, like ever in history, like 30 million tons underneath a basin. And recently, they also increased their nuclear power plant reactor production capacity. They can build 50 reactors at the same time. So they have the production coupled with the fuel in terms of the uranium that could diversify their economy's energy portfolio within like 5 years. So from that perspective, it made me realize that if they are going to curb China and they are just a couple of years away from going nuclear in terms of powering and electrifying their energy grid, that might explain why it's happening now. How do you interpret it? Okay, we've lost Carl Zha here.
Because of internet
Hey,
connection, I think.
yeah, okay,
Yeah.
you're back. You're back. Got you.
Okay.
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 Did you
Maybe
hear
my
my?
internet. Okay. Sorry.
It's okay. Did you hear my question or no?
It's only the beginning. Only the beginning. If you could repeat that, that would be great.
The beginning of what? My monologue or the question?
No. Your question. Your question.
Oh, okay.
You
I was
have
just
some
gonna say
question
how.
about. You think it's because you think they have a small limited window to choke off China's energy supply because China is bringing all this nuclear energy online. That's what I heard.
Yes. So the question is, I guess, multi-pronged. It's, why do you think the war was rushed and why is it happening now? And do you feel, after everything you've seen over the last 2 months, do you feel as though this was always the plan? Or is this actually an impulsive, foolish war?
Well, I mean, they have this plan called the clean break. This from back in 1997 or 1998. I think it was presented by Daniel Pipe to Netanyahu, and this was actually referred to by Wesley Clark, the spring commander of NATO. He said the plan was to take out 7 countries in 7 years, right? And these are among the 7 countries. Um, among the 7 countries, Iran was basically last one standing, and the idea of the clean break is really to remake the Middle East for for the Greater Israel, to enable the Greater Israel project. But Iran remained the biggest obstacle to this plan, and there's a reason Iran has been left out of that. That 7 country list for a long time, because it's just Iran is just a hard nut to crack. All these seven U.S. presidents have resisted Israeli pressure to carry out this plan for the clean break plan. I mean, no. They didn't resist the clean break plan. They have implemented, in Iraq, going to war against Iraq and all that. But they have resisted going war against Iran because Iran presents a much harder nut to crack. But I think it does brings question why now? Why was Israel able to get Trump to do their bidding? I still think I still think they have some compromise on Trump. Like there must be some nasty stuff in the Epstein file, and Trump is just happened to be dumb enough to actually go through with this. We have people coming out now saying that Netanyahu has been trying to pressuring Obama, Biden, and then none of them took the bait. And here Trump, what Trump, I can only speculate. I still think this is a Zionist plan to go after Iran. Not it doesn't mean that United States also do not want to take out Iran, but they also have recognized the kind of the difficulty to actually wage a war against Iran. And that U.S. Pentagon has did many war games, and they have never succeeded, even in their war game scenario against Iran, and particularly when it comes down to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. So this is a well known problem, and yet for somehow Trump went ahead with it. I think Trump he got some really bad advice from some of his advisors. Well, Trump, for his part, he blames Kushner. He said Kushner told him it would be easy, and I think that's quite possible. You have people like Kushner, like Pete Hegseth, telling him, "Oh, sure, yeah, it would be a cakewalk," and Trump was probably foolish enough to believe them. But this is not a well executed plan. I mean, look at the latest report. They just confirmed that Iran has completely destroyed 11 U.S. bases in the region, and they did it with F-5. That's a 60-year-old airframe. Like the airplane is older than me. The F-5 came out between end of Korean War and beginning of the and Vietnam War, and somehow the Iranian pilot was able to fly those F-5, bombing the U.S. bases unopposed. This is a plot of Top Gun Maverick. I just never expect Top Gun Maverick to be Persian, but yet here we are, and all the copium about that is like, oh, this is because the U.S. military personnel has already evacuated the base. This is why there was no one to man the air defenses against F-5. But that's not a win. You abandon your base in the face of Iranian attack. That's not a win for the United States. So this war has exposed a lot of problems about the U.S. military. U.S. Navy, they can barely feed their soldiers. We have all these photos showing the kind of the pathetic type of meal they serve to the U.S. sailors right now. And the U.S. Navy came out with a disclaimer which was a group of AI generated images trying to convince us that the sailors have enough to eat. And there's a reason for that, because all their logistic bases has been destroyed. The U.S. Navy, they can't, they need to regularly restock, refuel, and right now all their bases has been destroyed. So they can carry out the regular restocking, and and also the U.S. military, they contract out, they offsource their supply line. So a lot of for example, all these meals, they're not being shipped from mainland continental United States to Persian Gulf to supply those sailors. What they usually do is they contract out to some local suppliers. Well, these local suppliers usually will be like suppliers in Saudi Arabia, in UAE. This is why the U.S. sailors, they usually get some the food packaging with like some like the type of milk that's specific to Middle East. So what happened is that now all these suppliers who would normally have supplied U.S. Navy out of ports of UAE, out of ports of Saudi Arabia, well, guess what? They can't do that anymore. They can't do that reliably anymore. And this is the whole reason the food problem is only a small facet. It's just a symptom of the disruption of logistics, U.S. military logistics. Modern wars are fought with logistics, and we have shown that U.S. empire turns out is a real paper tiger. It's very fragile.
So I want to ask you about the fertilizer again. So
Yeah.
we know that fertilizer prices are rising, and fertilizer is essentially a byproduct of it's a byproduct of natural gas production.
Natural
And
gas.
so
Yeah.
yeah, and so Qatar led this industry, and they had about 30% of the fertilizer going through the Strait of Hormuz from their natural gas productions. And so as a result, there's a shortage, and now 70% of farmers cannot afford the fertilizer that they need for this crop growing season in the United States. And so American farmers now are at risk of either bankruptcy or abandoning fertilizer, which could limit the amount of output, which obviously could push food prices up. But those are effects that could take a year to come in. You've pointed out that China actually also leads the world in fertilizer production, which seems like they just lead the world in
Yes.
producing everything.
Yeah.
But you're saying now that so it looked like China tightened their fertilizer exports, but now they're going to start increasing those exports. So could you elaborate a little further on the Chinese
Yeah.
fertilizer relationship in terms of the global economy?
Yeah, you're correct. The fertilizers are, there are several type of fertilizers: urea and nitrogen, potassium. The nitrogen and urea, they're all extracted from the natural gas. Qatar exports about 20% of the world's natural gas supply, and that shut off completely now. And they're also it affects more than fertilizer, but let's focus on fertilizer for a second. People's U.S. actually have a lot of natural gas. U.S. is a net exporter of natural gas, but what people forget is that natural gas or oil, these are globalized commodities. So what it means when you restrict supply in one area, that's going to be make the price go up everywhere because other people are now going to bid on the natural gas from North America. It's great for oil companies in U.S. Yeah, no doubt. I mean that's it's great for the oil majors, but for the consumers, not so much. So this is why even though U.S. is abundant in natural gas and the net natural gas exporter, farmers still can't afford the increase in the fertilizer prices because this natural gas have been bid up. By everywhere. Like the big oil companies, they can make more profit by exporting those natural gas to other places, to Europe, to India, to these other to Japan, to these other places. So there will be less fertilizers for domestic consumption, and this is the whole reason that the price is going up. And this is also behind China's initial ban on fertilizer export because they want to make sure that Chinese farmers will get their first dip on the Chinese fertilizers, rather have them send them out export for higher profit. Because food security is, China always take food security very seriously, and China has been China also. So I'm not sure about the food fertilizer situation, but I know China just recently relaxed thinking about reopening export for gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. Fertilizer might be further down the queue because like I said, China takes food security very seriously. They'll make sure the Chinese farmers will get their first dip on fertilizer. Then they might consider export if they have in excess. But this is not how it works in the United States, right? U.S. they will export to whatever to make the higher profit. So this is why the price continue to rise in United States, even though U.S. has abundant natural gas and a net natural gas exporter.
So it sounds like the Strait of Hormuz has not really affected China, at least not yet. China has been preparing for this for a very long time with the strategic reserves and the fertilizer export controls. And so they're prioritizing their own domestic population. But they've done such a good job of this that now they're potentially going to start exporting again to countries in need. This is what kind of fascinates me about the situation because we think about it in a very simplified manner, like Iran closes Strait of Hormuz and therefore like economic catastrophe, right? And it kind of is brewing in that direction, but it's 2 months out now and life is mostly the same. It's just slightly more expensive. And then you have, okay, you're gonna
Let
stop
me
me. Go
let me
ahead.
let me let me chime in. So there's a time delay, right? It takes about 50 days for a or gas tanker from Middle East, from Persian Gulf to travel to say United States. So just about a few weeks ago, the last batch of tankers that have left the Persian Gulf before the war started just arrived, right? So people have been buffeted by kind of this time delay. We haven't not even seen the real shortage yet. The real shortage is coming. I mean, like it's gonna get much worse because even if they reopen, even if they reach a peace deal today and reopen the Strait of Hormuz, things are not going to be back to the level of pre-war because the gas production, Iranian gas field was hit by Israeli, and in return, the Qatari gas facility got hit by Iranian missiles. It's going to take month to restore production, and you might not even restore to the previous level because these oil gas production, they're very kind of intricate processes. They have to maintain constant pressure. Just to give an example, Kuwait, the Kuwaiti oil and gas field, they still have not reached the same level of production pre invasion by Saddam. This is and that they only had like experienced several months of outages. They only had the several month stoppage of production. Back then this is gonna be much worse because when these oil people think like oil, well, you just like turn a knob and things just flow back again. No, that's not how it works. Like you have to maintain like a constant pressure. Otherwise, it's going to damage the wells. It's going to damage the facility. And it's going to take, it's a lot of the, I just read a reports, even if they were trying to restart production today, to restore the production level to pre-war level, they will have to, in many cases, they'll have to drill new holes, which is very expensive and take a lot of time. So we just have not seen real shortage yet because we were still getting the oil and gas from the Persian Gulf, but the last batch that left the Persian Gulf before the war, they already arrived a few weeks ago. So we're gonna see much worse shortage in the coming weeks and months.
Very interesting point. I'm glad that you clarified that logistics supply line and supply chain and the travel times. That definitely helps us understand why it took so long for prices to finally break $120 per barrel on the crude prices 60 days out, and it seems like there's no end in sight. The point I was trying to make, though, is that we view these conflicts and these strategies in a very simplified manner, but it actually seems as though the global economy is a lot more sophisticated and complex than we think. And so I remember asking you 3 months ago before the war kicked off, wouldn't the closure of the Strait of Hormuz affect China, given that China's like 13% of their energy comes from Iran? But you pointed out how it's actually a lot more complicated than that, and they haven't. Not only have they not experienced a shortage, they've increased their strategic reserves during this time, and so that was very interesting. And now we're seeing Russian sites are being attacked, but also Russia themselves are also cutting off pipelines. They're preventing oil from reaching Germany. And so Russia's also playing this game of trying to cut off energy, and everyone seems like they're trying to maximize pressure on everyone else. So how do you interpret this game we're seeing of, China prioritizing their domestic population, cutting off supplies, but then also thinking about maybe helping the world by continuing to export again, Russia turning off oil, the US, continuing this blockade. There's a lot of conflicting interests and strategies here. And then Iran is, of course, just trying to maximize what they can gain from the closure. What exactly is the Russian strategy here, and how does it fit in?
Well, I don't know if Russians are attacking their own oil facility. There is a Ukraine. There's a Ukrainian angle here, and the Ukrainians are backed by NATO. And it says right now there's a lot of oil refineries are getting attacked all over the world, which is concerning. And for China's perspective, China will be hurt. I mean, don't get me wrong. China will be, or everybody will hurt. China will hurt, but China will hurt a lot less than other countries. In a in a situation. Oh, I see. Block Kazakh oil flow to Germany. Okay, yeah. Because there's a lot of Rush. So despite the sanctions on Russian oil and gas, um, there's a lot of still the Russian oil and gas continually flow to other markets, including Europe. This happened, for a while. India was making bank by essentially reselling Russian gas and oil to Europe at a premium, and looks like Russia is cutting off the other alternative route, which gain does help them gain leverage, but for China, I would rather focus on China because like Russia is not my expertise. China itself, it will hurt, but it will be hurt a lot less than other countries. This is like a case of running away from the bears. You are not trying to outrun the bears. You're trying to outrun other guys. China will be outrunning the other guys. China will hurt the least among all the people that will be hurt. But China will still be hurt, and this will just accelerate China's current drive to achieve energy independence. Like you already allude to it earlier about China's expansion on nuclear power. China never actually put all eggs in one basket. China has been doing a huge rollout of solar, wind, hydro, nuclear, and they're now making real headway in nuclear fusion, which would be huge. Once the nuclear fusion became commercialized, that's a boundless energy, because the current nuclear power is provided by nuclear fission, but the nuclear fusion is a lot cleaner. Rather than produce nuclear waste, you produce water, and once the nuclear fusion and China also it has commercialized a thorium reactor, which is much more cheaper. So China already achieved about 86% of energy self-sufficiency in primary energy production. But that number will continue to go higher and higher. And this is why China has been pushing to electrifying the country. The reason they're connecting the country from end to end with high-speed rail, and all these high-speed rail lines are electrified, is so they will be less dependent on imported oil. And I think and Chinese EVs, I think now will gain wider adoption outside of China as well. So we're going to see a huge push in that direction. Like the oil shock in the 1970s, that kind of completely reoriented uh, economy. That's when Japanese car became very popular because they're more fuel efficient. What we're seeing right now, this war is gonna give a huge push to the adoption of Chinese EVs everywhere, and as well as importation of Chinese solar panels. In a lot of the global South country, particularly where the state capacity is rather weak and they couldn't provide enough grid power. Now people can just buy affordable solar panels, put on their roof, and then you don't need to be on state grid, and you can be energy self sufficient. And the batteries has come down in such a level that now you can store actually the solar energy for you to use at night. So I think the world is going to move a lot quicker in that direction, but fertilizer is still an issue because we still need the fertilizers, and that will still have to come from natural gas. And this is so that part really concerns me because we cannot. People say, oh, by in November Trump will get his lesson in the November election, but the world cannot wait till November. By November, it's too late. Like the whole year's worth of crop would have gone unplanted because of lack of fertilizers. So that's the part I worry the most. The other part, the U.S. blockade will fail. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
sorry.
mean, right
I
now.
just wanted to ask you about this. Yeah,
Okay, go
we've
ahead.
been talking for 45 minutes, so I want to get your thoughts on uh, obviously whether you think the blockade is actually going to work. It sounds like you don't think it will, but I wanted to just get you to elaborate on that a little bit, and then I'll ask you a final quote after that.
Sure. I mean, the Trump's blockade on blockade is just the very typical Trump negotiation tactic, right? I mean, the idea is he want to break Iran's economy, and by preventing the Iranian oil export. This is actually interesting and ties in what we said earlier about blockading China's energy supply. So right now, the U.S. Navy is playing a cat and mouse game with Iranian tankers in Indian Ocean. So a lot of the Iranian tankers, what they do is after they sail out the Iranian territorial water, they just hug the coastline and sail in the territorial water of Pakistan and India. And United States, at this point, they do not want to violate the territorial water of Pakistan and India, so they set out. So instead, they wait until those Iranian tankers travel out of the Indian territorial waters. The gap between India and Sri Lanka. When those tankers sail out of Indian territorial waters, and before they reach the next territorial water of the next country in the open sea. That's where U.S. Navy carry out a lot of its interdiction. But if the I keep in mind, most of the Iranian tankers are heading over to their ultimate destination. Those oil are going to China. If the goal was for United States to choke off China's energy supply, they should just place a blockade at Strait of Malacca, because a lot of the Iranian tankers, their destination is to traverse the Strait of Malacca, go to the east side of the Strait of Malacca into South China Sea, where a lot of the Iranian crude will get offloaded, and loaded into different tankers, and those oil will be marketed off as Malaysian crude oil and get exported to China. This is where we get the figure about 13% of Chinese oil import actually come from Iran, because right now, according to official sources, 13% of China's oil import come from Malaysia. Most of that is actually Iranian and Venezuelan oil. Um, and so if U.S. really want an effective blockade, rather than play cat and mouse game in the Indian Ocean, they could have just blockade the Strait of Malacca like they always claim they would to blockade the Chinese energy supply because that's the Iranian tankers will have to traverse Strait of Malacca anyway. But yet, United States chose not to do that. I'll leave. I mean, I have a couple. I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is U.S. don't want to panic the world market. The moment U.S. blockades the Strait of Malacca, that's gonna tank the stock market everywhere. This is something that Trump administration do not want to do because a lot of the world marine traffic goes through Strait of Malacca. Not just China, but this affects everybody. The stock market will definitely be spooked. Another reason U.S. decide not to blockade the Strait of Malacca is now you are talking about where they're going to have to carry this out at the tip of South China Sea. Now, Chinese Navy, they may not have the capability projection, the power projection to go challenge the U.S. Navy in Indian Ocean, but they have been building their whole capacity to dominate South China Sea. That's the whole point of the Chinese Navy. This is why I think this is my personal estimate why U.S. chose not to blockade cat and mouse game in the Indian Ocean. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
A final question, if I may. We're pushing 50 minutes now. I appreciate you
Sure.
spending this time with us today. It's been a while since we've spoken, and so there's been a lot to cover. But so long story short, China's handling this situation very well, and they've been preparing for it for a long time. I think Russia has been conditioned for this, Iran as well, given that they've been under attack, under sanctions for many years now. Everyone else is catching up. It seems like the U.S. is, with every sanction and every aggressive act, they are hurting their supposed allies more and more. And it got me thinking that the U.S. is, even though they've built these institutions, NATO, they give their blessing to the European Union, they have all these arrangements with their allies like South Korea, Japan, India, Western Europe, etc. They don't trust the institutions they've built. They don't trust the alliances or friendships they've made. So they're aggressively trying to cement their gains heading into a multipolar world. And that's why they will blow up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, affect the energy market so they can aggressively insert American companies that are too expensive for these people to do business with. But now that there's a shortage, they have no choice. And so the way I see it is that the U.S. is either this is at the worst end, potentially leading to, God forbid, World War III level escalation. And on the best case scenario, they're just trying to cement and aggressively insert their American companies into a multipolar world where they can't really compete with China, Russia, or Iran. How do you interpret this overall
Yeah.
strategy?
Yeah, I think it's definitely the latter. I mean, Marco Rubio himself acknowledged the multipolarity is already here. So, if you read the Pentagon papers, that's what they claim. To refocus on U.S. dominance of the West Hemisphere, and yeah, there's not going to be a pivot to Asia as envisioned by Hillary Clinton, because right now there's by the way, when they say pivot to Asia, they're talking about pivot to East Asia. That ain't happening because right now they're drawing away all the U.S. military asset away from East Asia, including Marines from Okinawa and that that ballistic missile defense from South Korea. Now they're shipping them to West Asia. It turns out the pivot to Asia is pivot to West Asia. I don't think the U.S. That it's their plan again. U.S. What's that say? The plotters plan. The plotters plot and plan, but But Allah is the best planner. United States is just not very good at this. I mean, we don't have the best brains. You have Trump claim that he liberated eight AI generated Iranian women, right, from execution. So, we're not dealing with the sharpest tool in the shed here. So you can count on them to f up whatever plan, whatever grand strategy they originally have. Yeah.
Well, Carl, I thank you so much for being here today. I'm just going to quickly share on the screen your X account so that people can follow you and check out your work. So let me just add that to the scene here. Here we go, Carl Zha. So you can follow him on Twitter, of course. I'm going to be linking all this information in the description. But check out his X account. He has 200,000 plus followers for a reason. His tweets are routinely going viral for their sarcasm and wit, which is a nice addition to geopolitical analysis, which is usually pretty cold and dark. So he's fun to follow on X. He also has the Silk and Steel podcast, which you can see here. He has, how many episodes have you released now?
Uh, I don't know, a lot because I've been doing it for several years now. But I am doing a chronological retelling of the Chinese history from the very beginning, and currently I'm in the year 221 BC at the unification of China under the First Emperor. So if that's your cup of tea, follow me on Patreon, where I run the Silk and Steel podcast on Chinese history.
Yeah, so Carl, thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to the next time we have a discussion.
My pleasure, Amal. Anytime.